to the first episode of Golden Age of Cinema, a new podcast where three of us discuss our favourite and not so favourite films of the 90s. Where this came about was a rather messy morning on a cricket tour in Barbados, where one of our panellists, who I'll introduce in a minute, decided to describe 90s as the golden age of cinema. So today's topic, we've decided to pick that magnus opus, Point Break. And before we go into things, I'll just introduce everybody. So I'm Matt Sutton. We have Seb Gemez and Mike Holmes. Howdy, lads. Welcome.
Howdy.
Seb, I think if I remember, this might have been your choice. So do you want to give us a quick overview of what we're about to discuss?
Gladly. I mean, it was actually your choice, Matt, but we'll point fingers later on. So, Point Break was the 1991 film directed by Catherine Bigelow, starring Patrick Swayze and the triumph that is Keanu Reeves. What a film, guys! It was rumored that James Cameron had a writing credit that was actually never accredited to him, and you can understand why. But we'll get to that later. Let's start with our thoughts on the film.
Well, just to pick up on that point, Sebby, if memory serves, James Cameron has been married 5 times. One of those 5 times was to Catherine Bigelow. I suspected at about this time when she made Point Break. So there's possibly more than a little grain of truth to that rumor. But I think if we sort of start with when and where did we first see this film, Seb, I might pass that over to you as a starting point.
Yeah.
Kick us off.
I saw this film for the very first time last night, and then rewatched it this afternoon, and was just blown away in so many ways. But we'll get on to that. My initial thoughts of the film was that, especially the first half, is that it was trying so hard to win me over. And in its try-hardiness, it was just so outrageously cheesy. From the very first credits, the waves, the synth, the shocking font, just everything about it. The crisscrossing of the 2 words point and break and the credits for Keanu Reeves and Patrick Swayze. Just everything about it screamed, "Please love me."
And yet,
it did eventually win me over in the second half of the film. But we'll get to that.
Okay, I'll feel that question. The first time I watched this film was in my 4th year of university. It was the Easter break, and I decided not to return to the rolling hills of Yorkshire, but actually to remain in my university campus in order to write my dissertation. Now, it was such a shame that I didn't get to write my dissertation on Point Break, but I was locked away with a crate of a Ranji boom. Shout out if anybody loves a boom. And it was one of the only DVDs that was left in my university campus library. Now, I think around the time as well, I just marathoned a session of Con Air. Shout out to that, because that might get done in a future episode. But my first take on it was, dear God, why is Keanu Reeves ever committed to celluloid? My second thought was, Christ alive, doesn't Patrick Swayze have a chisel jaw? My third take was, didn't Catherine Bigelow win an Oscar? Because that's a hell of a journey to doing Point Break all the way to The Hurt Locker. Another great film, but slightly with more artistic merit. But yeah, at the time, it was a welcome respite from reading classic translations of Roman letters to indulging early 90s LA softcore porn. And let's not remember, while you see the surfer chick undressing probably within about the first 10 minutes, I'm pretty sure Keanu Reeves is topless within about 3 minutes. So, yeah, my first take was, Christ alive, this is awful. And then I had to give myself a slap and realise that arguably this is where the Go act started.
This is a seminal entry point into the golden age of cinema. This film started pre-production in the 80s, and you can really tell because of the hair and the costumes. Just all of it is pretty just wacky 80s LA style. But really, I think the main interesting point in this film is just the juxtaposition between the performances of Keanu Reeves and Patrick Swayze. And I really want to get into this now because I think.
Well, hang on, let's just 1 sec. We're forgetting Mikey's take on this. As a man who lived and breathed it, probably over the time when it was there, he was probably rocking his own Patrick Swayze mullet back in suburban Sydney back in like 91, rolling out to a Cineflex. Take us through it, Mikey. When did you watch it?
You are correct. Being of a more
stronger vintage,
more aged vintage, yes, than yourselves. I did see this not at the cinema, but on video in about, let's say, the first half of 1993. I'm sure that was in Sydney at the time. I'm sorry to say that at the time I really did enjoy it. I think it raised important questions to me at the time around what I believe the genuine spirituality of surfing, with which this film seemed to invoke within me. Also at the time, considering my future career options, I think I was 16 that year. Considering future options, law enforcement was one possibility, and I did genuinely consider that, this was perhaps a semi-realistic portrayal of what law enforcement duties might entail.
With surfer board and sex wax in hand.
All of that. I think that Gary Busey being not a formative influence, but certainly he was very prominent in the late 80s and the early 90s. Keanu, fresh off Bill and Ted's Excellent Adventure and Parenthood, and just prior to Bram Stoker's Dracula, and Patrick Swayze, who at the time he had done Dirty Dancing in the late 80s, but the movie Ghost was a massive hit, and he was just sort of everywhere at the time. So he followed, perhaps as a sort of departure from Ghost, he followed up with Point Break. At the time, I thought it was very entertaining. I did enjoy it very much at the time. It made me want to take up surfing, I'm sorry to admit. I didn't incidentally, but all the youthful vigor, the 90s, the Red Hot Chili Peppers, their album Blood Sugar Sex Magic came out about this time. They were a hot band at the time. So, the LA vibe, the 80s morphing into the 90s, this film really captures that, I think. So, yes, at the time, I gave it a big thumbs up.
And now?
And now, I think, it's still entertaining, as a, don't expect too much. But it's not a good film. The plot is ridiculous. The performances are I think fairly cliched. Swayze does a reasonable sort of job of what's asked of him. Gary Busey, John C. McGinley, Laurie Petty. Again, they sort of did what was asked of them, but I mean, bank robbing surfers and FBI agents surfing to catch them. I mean, how many martinis were required to come up with this premise?
Look, as we know, we hadn't reached the Everest of 1997, which we'll cover in a future episode of The Great Stage of Cinema. But my take, having just finished watching this a little less than an hour ago, and it is that will be over a decade probably since I last watched it, was pretty much similar to yourself, Mikey. Everybody, I thought, was trying their best with what is basically a wafer-thin script, and that's doing a disservice to wafers.
I'll have to see that point.
Gary Busey. See, I always remember, I'm not sure if any of you have watched this, Gary Busey was in Entourage for a couple of seasons, where he basically plays the exact same character that he does in Point Break. But let's be frank here, and he's one of my favourite actors. Actor is a very loose term. I know he's one of Seb's favourite actors, but this is carried on the rather slender shoulders of quite possibly the worst actor or one of the worst performances I've ever seen in an action film. Keanu Reeves. The guy is just chewing dialogue for the whole 2-hour runtime. His delivery is non-existent, and any semblance of dramatic tension. I'm sure we'll come on to individual scenes at the end, but the last line of the film, when you just need a bit of punch and weight as he throws his badge into the sea, is goddamn awful. I don't know if anybody else could have rescued it. I don't know. Maybe you put Nick Cage in there. Maybe he's got a better result. Who knows?
On that, just quickly, it's quite interesting to hear the names that were in for the role during pre-production. I'm sure, as you can imagine, Keanu Reeves was somewhat of a last resort at this point.
I very much, I imagine so.
But some of the names that were touted for the role include Johnny Depp, Val Kilmer, who I think is probably the best of the lot here. But probably Matthew Broderick.
Well, that's, I mean...
And Charlie Sheen. And I would have liked to see the Charlie Sheen movie.
Charlie Sheen's, I think that's sort of plausible for the time, because the late 80s, early 90s, he was churning out a lot of now forgotten movies. Val Kilmer at the time was actually quite a serious actor, fairly well regarded. This is before Batman Forever, of course. I mean, Johnny Depp, coming off of 21 Jump Street, before
Edward Scissorhands is 1991, so...
Yes, exactly right.
I think with Johnny Depp, the main thing, and comparing Johnny Depp to Keanu Reeves here, is that with Keanu Reeves' performance, you believe that he could be... You don't believe that he could be either an FBI agent, no matter how vociferously he proclaims it, nor a surfer dude. Whereas Johnny Depp, you could kind of believe him at least being one of those things, depending on how he played it.
Yeah, I'd agree with that. I think, I mean, at the time, Keanu Reeves was, Bill and Ted was what he was known for. So I think in fairness to him, he worked very hard through the 90s to break that mold. I think it wasn't really till the Matrix that he really did manage to break it and start to change some of the perceptions of him as an actor. But I think, after this, he did Bram Stoker's Dracula, which demonstrated at the time certainly his limitations in terms of range. And I think Speed, which was a massive hit and is also a very entertaining film. I think his performance in that was a lot better than in Point Break. But I'm sure that he did leverage some of what he did in Point Break for that role in Speed. But I think with Keanu in Point Break, he's trying very hard to break the typecasting of Bill and Ted and movie Parenthood, which was he basically played Bill again. So I think he, in fairness, I mean, he did, I think, another film called Little Buddha, I think, about this time, which was, another attempt to break that mold. So, in fairness to him, I mean, it's strange thinking, how far he's come, what he's done since. I think he's actually a very good actor, and he's done some great work, but. He had to.
But not here has he done great work. And I'm
just
no.
And
I'm just going to go into some of the beats, big emotional beats of the film that he just totally and utterly butchers, if I may. So, firstly, you've got when they go to check out the getaway car. You got his big. You might not be able to do it because you're a washed up cop, but I can because I'm young and hot and on the scene. And he just comes across as half Bill and Ted, as you say, and half Mr. Anderson from the first half of The Matrix. A second big emotional beat is when he goes into the chip shop to, woo his surfer chick, and tells his story about how his parents died in a car wreck and about why he wants to start surfing. And it's just, I genuinely, at that point, paused the movie and just thought, I don't know if this is true for his character or if it's false, but either way, I do not believe it.
Can I just make an addition there, Seb? Never, ever, for the duration of us doing any of this podcast for films in the 90s, try and unpick anything like those plot points. Plot didn't exist in the 90s. This is why this podcast is such a good idea.
Dear.
Him trying to have an emotional arc. And also, I had the benefit of watching this with my girlfriend this afternoon, who quite rightly pointed out the level of misogyny. She was very easily convinced by said bullshit story. And spent the first half an hour of the film, whenever you saw her, getting a kit off.
Exactly.
And then ended up I guess one of the big plot points, the big plot point for Keanu is she ends up being some kind of quasi-sex toy between Patrick Swayze and Keanu, but you never really find out what happened with Patrick. And I can't remember the name of the actress. Who was it?
Laurie Petty.
Laurie Petty, that's right.
Was she in another film? I mean, who knows?
She did several. She did a few in the film and TV in the early 90s. A League of Their Own. I think she with Gina Davis. She did that. She did a couple of other sort of relatively well-known films, and then sort of killed a career with a film in 1995 called Tank Girl, which was a comic book adaptation, much maligned. Somehow Naomi Watts managed to survive being in it. Ice-T, I think, was in it as well. Didn't do his career any favors, but basically, after Tank Girl, we sort of never heard from Laurie Petty again, other than obscure TV sort of bit parts. But early 90s, she was there.
Now, of course, one thing that we probably don't need to spend too much time on here, is it the 2018 sequel?
2015. We won't.
2015.
Oh, the remake.
Did any of the remake? Yeah. Did anybody from the original make it in? Obviously, Swayze, God rest his soul, would have been 6 feet under, but surely she'd have been an ideal candidate to bring back. She'd have needed a paycheck because Lord knows this film did something to kill her career off, didn't it? Yeah.
I don't think anyone in the original Point Break was in or involved in the 2015 remake of the same name, nor by the sound of the remake's box office take did any of them go see it, or anyone go see it, in fact.
No.
It was widely panned and totally missed what little point there is to miss in Point Break, but missed the soul of the film completely from what I've heard. Back to this version of Point Break. I think, as I said, I was really, really sort of non-engaged by the first half of the film. But as soon as you get to the first shootout and that action sequence, all of a sudden, I was hooked. And
I just the one where Keanu, the FBI bust.
Exactly. Yeah. And I think that Catherine Bigelow, despite the fact that, for the pretty much that first 45 minutes to an hour of the film, we're dragging our feet a lot. We finally get to a great action sequence. And I think, in fairness, she absolutely nails it with the direction, because it's a great, honestly gripping action scene, great set piece. And then from there, we get the twist that Patrick Swayze and Bodhi is the ringleader of the ex-president, and the whole plot and the whole film goes into overdrive and takes on a different dimension. But before that point, we're just treading water. Pardon the pun.
To be fair, I think the action sequences are actually pretty good. The camera work is good. The tempo is good. Keanu, nobody has to really deliver much dialogue during the action sequences. They can just roll with it, so to speak. Never having held up a bank, I don't know how realistic that is or not. But watching it, it seemed to be, plausible. One of the more plausible parts of the film. I think the sequence where Keanu is chasing Patrick Swayze down and jumping through the through the houses and down the alleys, and he throws the dog at him and throws the dog aside, and then breaks or cracks his knee as he lands on the canal, and is given the choice. They lock eyes. The bromance that's going on. And as massively cheesy as it is, fires his pistol into the air.
The iconic scene.
The iconic scene, exactly right. I think the action sequences are good. I think the surfing sequences seem pretty good. I think the cinematography when they.
One sec, Mikey.
Yeah, go on.
Now, you referenced that bit where they're running. Where the iconic scene happens. When I watched this today, I couldn't help thinking, and I can't believe I'm putting these two films in the same breath. Do you think that is the same area where the T2 action sequence happens?
Yeah, I suspect it is.
That is entirely plausible, considering that James Cameron was director of T2.
Well, sorry, I interrupted your flow.
No, that's all right.
I would argue, sorry if I can just butt in, I would argue that emotional beat of him having the opportunity to kill Bodhi and refusing or not being able to go through with it is the one emotional beat in the film that A, requires no dialogue, and that B, Keanu Reeves actually gets right.
But then it doesn't make any sense. He's not, other than the guy saving him from getting beat up by a chili pepper, who, by all accounts, is about 5'2" and 95 pounds. I mean, Christ alive, there's no emotional connectivity between Bodhi and John. It just does, to me. It's wafer thin, as I said to you earlier, and that does a disservice to wafers.
I would disagree, because I would say that the night before, or the 2 nights before, whatever it is in the film, you have the scene where we have the scene where they go night surfing, and Bodhi teaches Johnny about being one with the waves, etc. And that's the moment where he really gets surfing, and becomes an adrenaline.
where he becomes a world-class surfer.
Yeah, where
like,
overnight
out of nowhere. Yeah.
No, hold up. He did have a good 90s montage earlier in the film. So, we all know what 90s montages can do. Just ask Rocky. But
very good.
But, that emotional connection was supposed to be a big turning point in the Johnny Utah character arc. And I think that is supposed to then reflect in this moment. Whether it misses the mark, well, your opinion is quite clear on that, Matthew, I think, is that you think it does miss the mark.
Character arc. Come on. I can't believe you've said that in fact, you haven't said it with a straight face because I can see what your reaction is. But come on, no one went into this with any really high expectations of us going to watch an early 90s version of The Town. I mean, that did bank Robin correct, didn't it? But it was fun. Other than let's I think a good bit to move to now. I think you've picked out probably the key area or the key turning point in the film, Seb. But Mikey, I'll turn to you, and then Seb, you give your take. Give me, for better or worse, your favourite scene in the film.
My favourite scene in the film, I think, would be, I think when they do the skydiving, where right. He realizes that they're messing with him. He's not entirely comfortable going on the airplane. They swap parachutes around, etc., etc. But then the adrenaline kicks in, having a great time. He's fully on board. It's one of the great experiences of his life. I think the filmography in that scene. I mean, it's a beautiful scene. I mean, it really is. I'm not sure where they shot that, but
very well shot.
It's well shot, and it's beautiful landscape, etc., and landing on the water, etc., and then Bodhi pulls him aside and says, "Yeah, got to show you something," and it goes in a complete. You think it's just that the tension's relieved, and then it's ratcheted up all the way, and you can see where the film's. You can see where they'll have a final confrontation. You'll see where it'll go.
I think that is a great scene, and I think that there are two great bits about that scene which I want to touch on, and the first is the precursor to it, where
is it your favorite scene?
No, it's not quite. I'm going to pick a different one, but that was very close. But the scene just before that, where they're talking about what they're going to do around the fire pit, and one of them's freaking out and saying, "We got to get out of here, man! Got to get out of here!" And Bodhi comes up with the following line. He says, "It's not about the money for us. It was about us against the system that kills the human spirit. We stand for something. To those dead souls inching along the freeway in their metal coffins, we show them that the human spirit is still alive. Then don't worry about this guy. I know exactly what to do to him." That scene just says everything about the Bodhi character in terms of what his mission is in this film, because I don't think that he's actually the antagonist of this story as he's mainly portrayed. I think he is at worst an anti-hero, and in my opinion the protagonist of this film, because he's the one with the mission. He's the one who's driving the plot forward, and that is to free Keanu Reeves' Johnny Utah from a straight-laced FBI lawyer background, football player, etc., to being a free soul who's alive. And instead of going in and calling him out for being an FBI agent, etc., he acts cool, he plays to his emotions, and he takes him on this great thrill ride skydiving with what seems to be initially, as you say, Mike, he's no bad intentions. I mean, there's the scene where they're all swapping parachutes, which is a great bit, because that really helps to build the tension. But you go through it, and then you realize that he's doing this not for any malicious reason, but for a genuine love and care for his antagonistic character. And I love that scene. I love that beat. I honestly think it's a real good bit of filmmaking in what is otherwise maybe not that good a film.
I think that's an excellent point, Sebi. Very well made, and I have to agree. I have to agree with you. I think that is a great scene, and if Bodhi is a crusader, and I think he is, that sums up his crusade
For sure.
So, I mean, I don't agree with any of that. Yeah, I feel, and you know what? I actually like this film, but I feel like I'm just the one tearing it to bits. The one caveat I would add to all the points that you made there, Seb. What does Brody do? Oh, Bodhi, sorry. What does Bodhi do? You're saying he's got this in-depth viewpoint and analysis on the world, and his objective as the protagonist is to change Keanu Reeves' viewpoint on things. What does Bodhi do? Who is Bodhi?
So great question, Matt, and I'm glad you asked because I did some research into this.
No. Don't read his Wikipedia entry. What does he do?
So what I'm going to read is Wikipedia entry. So earlier on in the film, when we're first introduced to Bodhi, after the credit sequence, where Tyler where Keanu Reeves sees him on the beach when he's just finished his surfing montage with Tyler and says, whoa, who's that guy? And Tyler says, oh, that's Bodhi. He's super good at surfing. They call him Bodhisattva. The Bodhisattva. And I looked up what the hell Bodhisattva was because I was like, what on earth is that? And I heard that, and I read on Wikipedia, thank you, Matt, that the Bodhisattva is a person who is able to reach nirvana, but delays doing so through compassion for suffering beings. So that's what this guy is. This guy is someone who is, has the ability to reach his enlightened state, his enlightened view on the world, but chooses not to ascend to nirvana in order to help those who are still suffering to reach it instead.
So what you're saying is
the criminal
that
using
there
his
is
to justify his nefarious activity. Is that correct, Matty?
And what you're saying is that you are bringing philosophy to a threadbare plot with minimal ability from actor to director. But yeah, I'll take it. So what was your favourite scene?
So on that same emotional arc, my favourite scene is the end scene, the final scene in the film.
Damn, you've stole my scene.
It is a great scene, and I love it because you really do see the difference in performances between Keanu Reeves and Patrick Swayze, because I think this is just a personal highlight reel scene for Patrick Swayze. When he's there, he's lived his whole life to get to this moment, and here he is, and all he has to do is convince this straight-laced FBI agent who he's been wearing down for the whole film to let him go and to live his life and to fulfill his mission, which he stated earlier in the film, which was, to die doing what he loved. He said, I can't take a cell, man. Can't take a cell. You can't do that to me, bro. And it was just, and I just love the atmosphere of the scene. The cinematography is actually really good. Decent fight scene. Shocking Australian accents, but we'll go over that. And then you get sort of the ultimate end for the character, and you just really do sympathize with a character that you have been told is wrong for the entire film. And I think it's a real nice scene at the end.
Mikey, thoughts?
I don't have a strong disagreement with Sebi there. I think, in fairness to him, given the material he had, etc., I think Patrick Swayze actually did a reasonable job, playing the role of Bodhi. I mean, it was
absolutely.
It was if you go back over his sort of previous roles or the roles that he played in the sort of previous 3 to 5 years, was something of a departure. I think it was sad what happened to him after this. Unfortunately, I think his career did start to sort of drop off through some poor film selections.
Hold that thought. I'll come to address that point in one moment. Yes.
But I actually think he did a pretty reasonable job in the role, and I think I don't disagree with said. Put it that way.
See, my view would be just to delve a little bit more into what you said there. At the point where Keanu finally finds him, miraculously, having looked in multiple locations over the 12 months, there's no rush or sense of theatre when he finally finds him. But I kind of thought that when you're looking at, again, Patrick's chiseled features whilst he's looking out on the sea, to my mind, there was a slight sense of melancholy in his eyes where he just thought, Christ alive, all that momentum that I had from Ghost and Dirty Dancing, I have just literally flushed that down the loo with 2 hours of utter bilge. And I think when he does, when he wipes out, and probably as we're led to believe that he does die, those are the last embers of his box office power dying away. But
I think you have to, in fairness to him, you have to appreciate that this was not, certainly, I mean, not now, but certainly at the time, it was not intended to be a great cinematic experience.
On that, it definitely delivered.
An entertaining film. I think it cost. Let me. I looked this up a second ago. Cost $24 million US to make. It made 83.5 million back. So it was, not a box office smash, but it was still quite a success. I think, if memory serves, at the time, it was, bear in mind that Patrick Swayze was really hot property when this was made, off the back of Ghost. I don't think it did his career any sort of massive, I don't think there were any sort of major problems from him being in this film. I think the films that came after did hurt him, but I don't think this one did, per se. So, I think, at the time it was entertaining. It was didn't win any awards, but I don't think it was trying to. I think it was fairly relatively well received. I think it's in hindsight, with the passage of time, etc. And as people look back and think, maybe like some of the early '90s fashions, what were we thinking? It's a pretty bad film, but at the time didn't take itself too seriously. I mean, it took itself a bit seriously, but not massively so. So, I think you just have to be a bit wary looking back after all these years, thinking, "Wow, what an utter turkey that was."
I certainly wouldn't. I wouldn't go that far. I'd like to give my take on my favourite scene, and given that you two have individually taken a heist scene and the ending, you've not really left me much meat to go into this Point Break sandwich. So just for my take, I'm going to go with the scene where the FBI do a bust on the drug gang.
Oh yes, Tom with his cameo.
Yes, exactly. Just it kind of reached a crescendo where you thought, oh well, actually, this was about the hour mark, and I thought I was going to save myself another hour of my evening. And alternatively, there could have been an earlier close to the whole Point Break saga. But one thing that really showed where Catherine Bigelow probably she was cutting her teeth in the action genre. And granted, that's not taking anything away from some of the earlier kudos that Seb gave on the first heist scene, but an emotional crescendo has never been reached quite like the point of Keanu Reeves looking into the rotator blades of a garden mower. I'm pretty sure that the gang did they have shotguns, semi-automatic rifles,
An arsenal? Yeah, they had an arsenal.
An arsenal to whatever I think Keanu says, and they're taken out by 3 handguns. And the often 90s trope of action cinema where the bad guys cannot aim. But it turned out to be the most effective member of that drug cartel, if we call them as such, was the naked blonde chick playing Stabby, who did the most damage, other than aforementioned Gordon Strimmer. And yeah, touching on that misogyny level again, where the blonde chick with her baps out, she was delivering all sorts of damage, where the other, where Fleabag or whoever it was from the Chili Peppers was doing no such damage. So
Anthony Kiedis, I think.
Yeah, I know.
Hold up there, Maddie, because we did see in the sort of prologue scene, the first credit scene, that Keanu Reeves got 100% in his shooting test.
Indeed, we did. Yes, that's a very good point.
So we know that he's a hot shot. But you're right, that sort of, 4 FBI agents with 3.5 handguns, one of which was stabbed down by a naked blonde chick halfway through the shootout, to take out an arsenal of, a cartel of druggies with an arsenal of weapons at their disposal is a bit ridiculous. But that lawnmower scene was proper tension.
I agree.
Proper something. That's what it was.
I'm just wondering how many liars out of 10 we might give Point Break. I don't know, Maddie, whether you want to just give a very brief background to the rating system that we're employing.
Yeah, sure. So the liar system is established on when we came up with the premise for the golden age of cinema, i.e. Seb had had one too many rum punches on Sandy Beach. We worked out that the pinnacle of the golden age of cinema, or GOAC for short, was the 1997 seminal classic, Jim Carrey's finest moment, and in fact the finest moment in all of cinema, whereby, as I think you astutely put it, Mikey, Hollywood executives said, "That's it, lads, we can't do any better." Liar, liar. So
let's not
all
try.
Films in subsequent episodes of the golden age of cinema will be judged quite rightly in how they perform against the Titan, which is Liar, Liar. Seb, marks out of 10, Liar, Liars out of 10, where you put in Point Break. I feel like it's best to start with you, because it's only going to go downwards, I feel.
I will go with 6 Liar, Liars out of 10. It could have scored so much higher had the first half of the film been in any way half decent, and Keanu Reeves wasn't just, well, if it wasn't Keanu Reeves. Apart from that, it gets massive plus points for just the Bodhi character in every sense, particularly Patrick Swayze's performance, and also loses points for the terrible sound mixing during all the surfing scenes.
6 Liar, Liars out of 10. Mikey?
I'm afraid, Maddie, I'm also going to give it 6. But 5 plus 1. The 5 because I give it a pass mark as an entertaining film, and it has some good action scenes in it. I think Patrick Swayze was actually pretty reasonable with the material that he was given. So 5 out of 10 for that. I'm giving it plus 1 just for the 90s nostalgia effect that I have, where I was at the time, the fact that I enjoyed it so much. It genuinely did make me think of the spirituality of surfing, and somehow that could combine with a career in law enforcement. So I'm giving it the extra liar, so 6 out of 10.
Right. Do you know, I felt that maybe both of you would have given it slightly more, which makes me feel slightly better than what I'm about to say. Um, I'm going to give it a 5, but like you, Mikey, I like what you did there. I'm going to give it a 4 plus 1. 4 because, I mean, if you go into this with the right mindset, it wasn't anything more that it pretended to be. Everybody in it has had, you know, way stronger entries on their CV. Keanu was not too far away from Speed, which I think was either 93, something like
94,
that.
I think. 94.
94. And who knows, you know, he wasn't that far away from that great film, Devil's Advocate. Christ, I can't believe we've never brought that up. But I'll give it 4 because it was passable. Watching it back today, which is probably the first time in 10 or 11 years, I had to just laugh at how they ever got these things signed off and got them greenlit. But Patrick, I mean, what can we say? The heartthrob of the 80s and 90s. And I'll give it the extra 1 just because it helped me through a really dark time and through about 16 cans of Orange Boom. So a 5 and 2 6s, I think that's quite fair.
Can I just say, I really, really enjoyed seeing the seeds of Dr. Cox from John C. McGinley as a hard-nosed FBI chief. You could just so much of Dr. Cox in there. It was just brilliant.
There is. Yeah, you're right. But also, if you ever watched Wall Street, I thought he basically, I think the guy is just capable of playing characters one way, but it's the same character that he plays with Charlie Sheen, of people that we've already spoken about in the original Wall Street.
I thought that too, but because he also plays a similar sort of character in Seven, very sort of shouty, SWAT team.
Good memory, yeah. I forgot about that.
But however, just to go pre Golden Age of cinema briefly, in Platoon, he's a much more nuanced squad leader within the platoon, a different sort of performance. So I think certainly they like him to, or that in the 90s they liked him to play to type, but I think he is more capable than what we've seen in Point Break.
I'm glad that we got to see him find his niche.
Indeed.
Okay. So, Seb, I'm going to ask you to come in at this point. Thanks, everybody, for the views on today. I thought it was a really enjoyable, in-depth analysis of Point Break. We've got 8 remaining films to review, so I'm going to ask you now, Seb, to pull up our next one, which we will do for next week.
Here we go, gentlemen. I won't reveal which films are on the shortlist, but I will reveal that next week we shall be reviewing 4 Rooms.
Having never watched it, I look forward to it.
Which is the 1995, I won't say classic, it's not very well known, but it's starring Tim Roth mainly, with credits for Antonio Banderas and directing credits for Quentin Tarantino, Robert Rodriguez, Alexandra Rockwell, and Alison Anders, featuring
4 directors.
The likes of Selma Hayek, Quentin Tarantino, and Madonna. So,
another stalwart of the golden age of cinema, what with Evita.
So, gentlemen, that's a really, really exciting film to go and watch. So, I really hope that everyone joins us next time for that one, because it's a humdinger.
Well,
very
thank
good,
you
Sammy,
for that.
very good. I think we should sign off there, lads. Sign off. I think it's time to wrap it up.
Great. See you all next week.
See you all
Yeah.
next week.
Take care.
We hope you enjoyed that episode of The Golden Age of Cinema, and if you did, join us next week where we'll be reviewing 1995's Four Rooms, an anthology comedy co-written and co-directed by Alison Anders, Alexandra Rockwell, Robert Rodriguez, and Quentin Tarantino, starring Tim Roth, featuring Antonio Banderas, Madonna, Bruce Willis, and Quentin Tarantino. So, have a watch and join us next time on The Golden Age of Cinema.